Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the London Society and the On London debate, Should London Be Bigger? My name's Leanne Tritton and I'm the chair of the London Society, and I want to thank the team at Convene here who've given us this amazing space, as well as all the free refreshments outside. So thank you very much to them. It's an exciting debate tonight, and I think it touches on a major issue which affects every part of London. And how it originally came about, this talk, was when we sat down with some of the great and the good who've been involved in London's housing supply to talk about what are the key things that you would change if you didn't have a mortgage to pay and you didn't have to say the right thing about London. And one of the core things was making London bigger and in fact reverting to London and the southeast. So that was the reason we started talking about this debate. Dave Hill from On London is one of the best known journalists and writers and commentators on London, and also who runs On London. And he will be introducing the panel later on. But I just wanted to give you an update on some of the things that we're doing at the London Society. First of all, we're concentrating on big ticket projects like this and talks like this. And the next one on our agenda is with Professor Kevin Fenton, who is in charge of public policy and health across London. And he'll be talking about the built environment and health and how that's impacting our lives. So please keep an eye out on the website for that. We're also publishing in September with Merrill a book called London of the Future. And this came about because the founders of the London Society back in 1923 published a similar book about the future of London. And it's an amazing read. If you get a chance to get hold of a copy, actually you will get a chance because we'll be publishing copies of it with the new publication. But we really feel that London has so many major issues that we need to come to grips with. And we're in interesting times politically in terms of how national government sees London, that we wanted to take the initiative and really start to talk about ideas for the future. So keep an eye out for that. And we're also working with Dave and a BBC producer called Andrew McGibbon. And they're actually, they've produced a number of radio programs in the past that have been award-winning. One was on the Olympics and the Olympic Park. So what we're doing with these factual podcasts is looking at long-form radio-style programs to talk about why London is changing. So looking at key parts of London, giving people a bit of clarity and translating these sort of major issues, which are sometimes presented as very black and white, very simple to solve. But Dave and Andrew will be showing that these are very complex areas. So keep a lookout for that. We'll let you know more about that. Just to a bit of housekeeping for later on, we expect quite a few questions at the end. And because we're recording this talk, please make sure that you wait for the microphone to come to you, because don't stand up and say, I can shout into the microphone, because Joe over on the mixing desk can't translate that on to the recording. So make sure you wait for the mic. The other thing I would also like to say is thank you for so many younger people coming to this event tonight. It's so important because you are part of London's future. And one of the issues that we want to encourage is a dialogue between some of the absolute legends of London who are here this evening, Nikki Gavron, just one of them. We want to encourage a dialogue that's intergenerational, because none of these problems that we have in London or the challenges are new. They're all ongoing discussions. So it's great to see you all here. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dave, and good luck.
Yes, so as you've heard, I'm Dave Hill and I run the website onlondon.co.uk. Special welcome to the people who are supporters of the website who are here, and a big welcome to everybody. Now, being very conscious of the fact that Professor Tony Travers is sitting in the front row, I'm going to say that the current boundary of Greater London as an administrative area was defined by the London Government Act of 1963, which also saw the creation of today's London boroughs. It was a time when the recently deceased fashion legend Mary Quant was doing a roaring trade from her boutique in the King's Road. The late Queen Elizabeth II was in her late 30s, and King Charles III was in his middle teens. You get my point. The boundary of Greater London, that's the territory, which was the territory of the brand new Greater London Council, recognised that even though London's population had started falling at that time, it made sense to enlarge the domain of its regional authority so that it better reflected the city's geographical bond with its fast-growing suburbs. But Greater London's border was only settled on after some suburban areas battled furiously to be left outside of it, and secessionist yearnings, I believe, still fester in parts of Havering and Bromley. Would it be wrong to assume that resistance of a similar ferocity would be mounted against even a murmured suggestion that Greater London should expand its sphere of influence still more? Probably would not, but that alone would not make it a bad idea. Greater London's geographical area has for a long time failed to correspond to what is defined sometimes as its economic area or its travel to work area. For at least 10 years, more people living within a fat home county's donut surrounding it have had jobs within Greater London than in their own home districts. So lots of people commute in. And London, by any of those earlier definitions, has been growing fast since 1990. Despite recent concerns about the rate of growth of its economic productivity, the impacts of Brexit and COVID, it seems to still be growing. Alongside this, the capital has continued to struggle with its enduring problems of housing supply, affordability and suitability, and with its transport networks and other things. So would current Londoners and theoretical future ones living in Hertfordshire and Surrey alike be better off if the greater component of Greater London was made greater still and brought into the realm of influence of the Mayor of London, whoever that mayor is or will be, the London Assembly and Transport for London? That is just a taster for the big questions to be addressed by our brilliant panel this evening, and during the second part of this event, by you audience members too. Our first speaker will be Jack Brown, luminary of the King's College Strand Group, lecturer in London Studies and author of a brilliant book called The London Problem. Our second speaker will be Andrew Boff, a very experienced member of the London Assembly, a former leader of Hillingdon Council, and for a long time a believer that London is too small. Andrew will be followed by Russell Curtis, renowned as an architect and also as a campaigner for more house building and for reform of the Green Belt, which is a matter of great relevance to our discussion this evening. And finally, Liz Peace. Liz was previously Chief Executive of the British Property Federation, and she now does a huge range of things to do with buildings of various kinds, including, very importantly, chairing the Mayor's Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. Now, they've all promised me that they will stick to 6 minutes each if they possibly can, leaving plenty of time for questions and discussion later on. So, Jack, please step forward.
Hey, thank you. There we go. Luminary, like that very much. Very nice. What Dave means is that I'm an academic, and as an academic, he's asked me to, he said, rise above the fray. Are we going to have a fray? I don't know, we'll see. But I am going to just basically give you a slightly more in-depth version of what Dave just said, but with slides. I think ultimately that's what this means. Please forgive me, but as an academic, I can't help but show you slides. I also can't help but be slightly too, on one hand this, on one hand the other. So this isn't going to be a strong polemic. I'll leave that to others perhaps, but we can have an argument afterwards. I'm going to make some more general points, and I'm a historian by training, so I show you this absolutely borrowed image from Barney Stringer. First off, to make the point that London's boundaries have changed several times historically. I'm sure lots of us in the room know this. There's the city in the middle, hundreds, if not thousands of years, that was London. 1889, we decided we could finally expand those boundaries to reflect the fact the city had got a little bit bigger, and you get the London County Council. This was basically out of date by the time it was established, though. The built-up urban area, the shift of population had gone way beyond that boundary, even in 1889. That said, it takes all the way till 1965 before we realise that this is actually the case. It's time to expand the boundary and have something called Greater London. And again, this has lasted ever since, this wider boundary here that we can see. I guess the point here is London has grown before, but also the boundary has grown and we've changed it before, we've made things better. Perhaps that's an argument for reform now. London's only grown since 1965. The population has grown many times. And therefore, you know, there's an argument for change. But surprise, surprise, it's not that simple. This image is from the Herbert Commission, which looked at between 57 and 60, that Greater London boundary, where should it be drawn? And if you can tell one thing from this map from a distance, you can't quite see it close up, it is that it is a lot larger, about a third extra large, particularly around the edges. Cheshunt is part of Enfield in this proposal, Epsom in Surrey, in fact, quite a lot of Surrey. Generally, a lot of places that didn't quite get included were included. You could say that's an argument for making Greater London bigger. If in 1957 to 1960, people thought that this was the right size for London, well, we've only grown since. That's an argument for expanding the boundary perhaps today. But I think the way that actually we come from this proposal to Greater London really does tell us a lot about what we could expect if we were to try and make London bigger today. Epsom and Surrey is a really good example, very close to the point where the new Greater London boundary was drawn. Epsom lobbied the government furiously. They didn't want to be part of basically an urban, built up, probably more Labour voting conurbation. They felt they were more comfortable outside. They were a bit more rural, conservative, perhaps with both small and large C at the time. And I guess if we're going to redraw those boundaries, we're going to probably expect to face those same challenges. Do you want to be part of a London that perhaps has a little bit more in common with itself than it does with you? So an argument for and against there, I guess. To return to this map, Dave mentioned travel to work areas. I love this map, it's slightly out of date. Blue area around the edge is an area where more people work in London than in a home district. That is a really clear argument, right? These people are economically, functionally part of London. So why not draw the boundaries out there and expand it? I guess a way I was thinking of articulating the reason for doing this earlier, these people, the people in the blue areas, did not pay for Crossrail to be built in the way that Londoners did. Londoners paid an extra bit for Crossrail to be built, but these people in the blue areas use Crossrail. That's not very fair, is it? One argument. On the other hand, these people, if they were to drive into London to commute regularly, this issue's come up recently, they have to pay ULEZ. That's not very fair when you consider that they can't claim the very generous scrappage fee for themselves, or they don't get to vote for the mayor. You know, if they are functionally part of London, perhaps they should be part of a Greater London governance unit. So that kind of makes sense to me. This is a map is from the London plan. It's basically the same thing again, but making the point that commuting patterns mean that London is kind of in all practical senses, much larger than that boundary. There is a question, not just a question of fairness. I mentioned people voting or paying, but the more wider sense of shared challenges. This many people coming in and out of the city means shared challenges around transport, housing, things like that. Would a Greater London be better at addressing those issues in terms of policy? I'm not entirely convinced by this, although I wait to be convinced by other members of the panel. I think that NIMBYs, to use a very loaded term, people who don't want development in their local area will continue not to want development in the local area, even if they are suddenly part of London overnight. In fact, if you look at people in, say, Enfield, and perhaps people is the wrong word here, there is local opposition to development, removal of car parks to build housing, for example, within Greater London as things are. So I'm not sure that shifting the boundaries fundamentally changes the kind of practicalities around addressing London's issues. I'm here to be convinced. But there is a political argument which I think is more convincing. These are general election maps, 2015, 17 and 19, not perfect maps, but they make the point. London is the little sort of island of a bit of Labour voting amongst a largely conservative sea. Making London's boundaries slightly larger would bring in some of that conservative voting area, and it would perhaps make London's mayoral elections, for example, more competitive. This was one of the arguments from going from the London County Council to the Greater London Council in the first place, that you would perhaps make it more politically competitive, and that's good for democracy. However, bit of a debate as to how long that's going to last. Just around the corner from me in Chingford, that has suddenly become a marginal seat. People are moving further and further out as the housing crisis continues to make inner London unaffordable. We've seen recently stories about how few children there are in central London. People are being forced out. This larger area around the edge of London will likely quite rapidly become more London-like. So you'd have to draw the boundary pretty big to make sure that it stays conservative, or at least swinging between the two. One final issue with doing that, you might have a London that swings between Conservative and Labour more easily, but you'd also have a massive London that the rest of the country would have to deal with. And at the moment, we're not the most popular city or place in the country. I'm not entirely sure if there's many people in the north of England crying out that London is sadly too small, and wouldn't it be better if it just had a few more people and a little bit more power. So a Greater London might have to find some way of addressing that challenge. This is likely to only increase over time as people continue to move from London into the wider southeast. Anyway, a few thoughts to start off. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now. So next, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I didn't get much sleep last night, so forgive me. And I don't think it was either the cats rushing around the house or the lingering anxiety of the 3 p.m. alert on my mobile phone. But it made me start to think about, it made me rehearse in my mind why it is that we haven't, why it's going to be so difficult to get a London that truly represents its economic power. Eric Pickles famously had in the top, he claimed he had, famously had a pearl-handled revolver in the top drawer of his desk when he was Secretary of State in charge of local government. And it was for the purposes of dispatching any official who came to him with a proposal for reorganization of local government. You can understand why that is the case. Reorganization and change of the boundaries is not straightforward. We can sit here and look at maps for as long as we like, and I know how old that map is. It's actually 8 years old because it was in my report that I published Southern Powerhouse 8 years ago. But you've got to understand that these changes in local government are fraught with difficulty. They are difficult. They are distracting for a government that's got other things on its mind, and they are divisive, not just divisive between communities, but divisive within things like political parties. You'll get people who are having radically different ideas from their party colleagues. And I know, for example, there is at least one person in this audience who thinks London's too big as it is. No names mentioned. But so it made me come to think, how do we actually persuade people that they want to change the nature of their government? Well, at the moment, people are, if you put to people outside London the idea that they might be subsumed in Greater London, they also might have a pearl-handled revolver ready for you, or or perhaps a pitchfork saying, get off my land. I don't know. But the point is that they see no benefits to themselves from expanding. They can see, all of us can, we can see the strategic reason why it would be a good idea if we coordinated the future planning of London on a much bigger scale than it is. And it needs to be a bigger scale. If you look at Tokyo, that's 13,452 square kilometers. Ile-de-France, 12,000 square kilometers, and London, 1,500 square kilometers. It's ridiculously small for the job it is expected to perform. So how do we persuade them? Well, for one thing, I think we need a new deal with local government. People don't feel that their local government, often when you see turnouts at local elections, you realize how little people have regard to their local authorities. In some cases, 30% is a good turnout. You know, it's quite bizarre. We need a new deal that actually entrusts people, local authorities with real control over their areas. And why is this important? Because all larger authorities, and the mayor, and I include the GLA, and not just this mayor, but the previous mayor and the one before there, they all love to play local. They all like to appear as though they're the ones that are providing those local services, which are so efficiently, in most cases, provided by local authorities. So they'll chuck money around there'll be the local implementation funding in London, and we're all supposed to say, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for giving us money that basically you took from us in the first place. The mayor also tries, the mayor, not this particular mayor, previous mayors as well, I'm being apolitical so far, they also like the idea of taking planning control out of the hands of local authorities because they've got their strategic view and they know so much better than local people do about what they want. Well, let's change that. If you started to give local authorities real power, real devolved power as a part of a settlement to increase the size of London, I think you'd start to get some progress in trying to persuade people at a local level, out in, say, Boreham Wood and places like that, as to why they might see their destiny within the Greater London Authority. One of the things is, of course, if we did expand London, there'd be a whole lot more London boroughs, considerably more London boroughs. Local authorities that are currently district councils would suddenly have control over things like education, social care, waste disposal, libraries and transport planning, something they don't have at the moment. It's a bit difficult to argue with the unitary authorities who probably already have those responsibilities anyway, but there must be some benefits. There should also be benefits when Greater London is, for example, planning great improvements in transport infrastructure, that it involves not as consultees, but as partners, local authorities. So those local authorities themselves can see the benefit of being part of a high spending, not so much high spending, I am a Tory after all, but the benefits of the budgets of the larger authority. We also have to invest an awful lot more faith in local government. They're basically mistrusted. Once we've, and mistrusted by everybody in the tier above them. You know, I'm a London Assembly member. And quite frankly, I'd much rather be a local councillor. A local councillor has so much more control than a London Assembly member does. And yet we appear like we're in a hierarchy somewhere above local councillors. That's not true. It's a different function to what local councillors do. And similarly, members of parliament are not local councillors. They have their own function. We need to give more faith to local decision, more trust in local decision makers, and give people a reason to support. Now, I don't believe the case is lost. I mean, I don't think it's impossible. And I will still take issue with everybody in this panel that uses the word NIMBY, because I have never met one in London. I have never met a NIMBY. I have met people who are concerned about the scale and the style of development on their doorsteps. I have never met anybody who said no development anytime at all. They just want to be involved. They just want to be part of the process. And by just throwing terms at them as though they don't care is an insult. It's an insult to people who deeply care about how their local authorities, how their local environment looks. You just have to get on their side. You just have to listen. You just have to give them what people want. And people want more homes. I want 40, and to conclude, because I'm getting over, there are two post-war pieces of legislation that were the most successful. One was the Greenbelt legislation, and the other was new towns. They were fantastically successful. Greenbelt's done exactly what it should, because it listens to local people's concerns about urban sprawl, and new towns is what we now need. The trouble is, we can't deliver the new towns without a bigger and more inclusive London. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. This isn't at all intimidating. Hoping the rain might put some of you off, but there we go. Right, so I've got some figures here, and it's a very nice segue from Andrew's piece about the Greenbelt, because I am going to specifically talk about the Greenbelt. But let's just look at a little bit at the housing delivery in London, and we are not delivering enough homes. So it's pretty clear that very little debate about the fact we're not delivering enough homes. A recent Centre for Cities report estimated our historic under-delivery at somewhere north of 4 million homes. And now that's not even taking into account the number of homes that we need to deliver to keep up with future growth. The Tory manifesto was for 300,000 homes per annum. We've not been anywhere near that figure for decades, with the housing targets recently being eliminated. There's even less chance of us achieving that. So we're clearly not doing enough. So as any discussion about the expansion of London has to involve the Greenbelt in some respect. And I am an advocate for taking a sort of sensible, pragmatic look at Greenbelt policy. Andrew's absolutely right. It's worked extremely well in the 70 odd years that it's been in place, but I do question whether it's still functioning as well as it might be. I've got a clicker. I've got some slides. So that's London's Greenbelt. It stretches from Godalming down in the southwest out to the North Sea. It's ginormous. It's something like over three times the size of London itself. Yet only 7% of London's Greenbelt is in London. We have no control over it. London has very little say over what happens in the Greenbelt that it's meant to contain. Now, there's a common misconception perpetuated by organisations like Campaign for the Protection of Rural England that Greenbelt is a protection of the quality of green space. It is absolutely not. It simply exists to constrain urban development. And a lot of the Greenbelt around London and other cities is already protected by other means. There's lots of different planning protections, areas of great landscape value, triple SIs, lots of different planning protections. If you look at the towns and regions around London, we're clearly not doing enough. They're clearly not doing enough to contribute to London. So it's a parasitical relationship. They have all the benefits of being within London's economic orbit, but are doing very little to contribute to its growth. So let's take some examples. Epping Forest in Essex, in the housing delivery test scores when they were still a thing, achieved 35%. So 35% of the number of homes it was expected to deliver by central government, it actually delivered. Brentwood, 66%, Sevenoaks, 62%, Tandridge, 38%. Now, a lot of these authorities have significant areas of greenbelt. All the four I've just mentioned are all north of 90%. So my suggestion is, why don't we expand London to the size of its greenbelt? Take back control of the greenbelt. Expand the number of boroughs. Let's double the number of boroughs, okay? So let's put all of those authorities that have greenbelt land within them, let's make them boroughs of London. And let's introduce a network of new garden towns and cities. Now that map there, the orange areas that you can see just appearing, what I've done there is I've taken the area of greenbelt and I've taken out all of the constraints apart from greenbelt to prevent development. So that's national parks, that's areas of protected landscape, flood areas, all that sort of and high value agricultural areas. And that's what you're left with. Now that has a population of something like 6 million at reasonable densities. If you take the existing area that I've covered there, that's 13 million people, including London. So a total number of population of just shy of 20 million people within that area. But it doesn't mean we're getting rid of the greenbelt. It just means that we are building in locations that are sustainable, close to transport, around rural stations, in areas with access to the road networks, all of that sort of stuff. It also puts most of the airports, most of London's major airports within, not quite within London, but on the edges of London. Perhaps we can bring all of the transport network under control of Transport for London, a fully integrated transport network, including the whole of the Queen Elizabeth line, Thameslink, most of Thameslink. You can buy a ticket when you land in Stansted, a TfL Zone 8 ticket that takes you into central London. And let's reform the greenbelt. Let's return greenbelt to its genuine purpose, which is preventing the merging of adjoining settlements. That's what it's about. It's not about protecting green landscapes. Let's reform the greenbelt. We can introduce it, put greenbelt within easy reach of more people, because you're increasing the borders around around all of these towns, so people have more access to the green space, better green space. And also a consequence of greenbelt is that you're just simply pushing development further out. So the boroughs sitting outside London's greenbelt actually have to bear the brunt of it, because that's where the developers are heading, because the greenbelt areas are protected. And so areas that have significant quality but are not benefiting from greenbelt protection are the ones that are suffering from inappropriate development in the wrong location. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Right. That's out of the way. It's going to be an almighty crash when I drop my microphone at some point, which I'm bound to do. Right, good evening. Thank you very much indeed for giving me the opportunity to speak. I've known Dave for a long time, but I was quite surprised when he asked me, because I don't think I've particularly sort of given my opinions on this subject before, but at least it made me go away and think about it. I then asked him why I was going last in the speaking order, and he said, well, it's alphabetical, so that's all right. But there are advantages in that. Because at least I've heard what everybody else has said. Jack's pinched one of my arguments, but I'm going to reiterate it anyway at some point. Also, having heard what everybody else is going to say, I am actually at heart a civil servant. I was one for 27 years. So I do tend to try and see both sides of an argument. And I think there are two interesting sides to this one. And this is a debate tonight. And I hope we're going to hear some interesting views on both sides. So first of all, I can see there are some excellent arguments for why you might want to make London bigger. I think the two biggest are definitely housing, the constraints of what the boroughs are trying to do within the boundaries that they already have. They need frequently, I think, to look beyond those boundaries. This is very much your argument, Russell, about the green belt. Of course, the government tried to sort that a few years ago. I can't remember what year it was now. Do you remember the duty to cooperate? This was going to be absolutely wonderful. So the boroughs would talk to the neighbouring boroughs outside, or the neighbouring district councils outside of London, and they would agree how to distribute their housing need, outside of London. Well, that got a long way, I have to say, i.e. it just didn't work. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Total failure of that duty to cooperate. So if you actually expanded the boundary, that might in theory make that easier. Transport's the other area. Now, I'm actually one of those people who commutes in from some 50 miles outside London. And I can remember actually when I was part of something called the Independent Affordability Review for Crossrail 2, snappy title, that when we were looking at how you could actually persuade the people out in Surrey, Sussex, Hampshire, that they jolly well ought to be contributing to Crossrail 2, because, actually I would benefit commuting in from Hampshire. It would make my run into London a lot easier because it would ease pressure on my lines, because other people would move on to Crossrail 2. Well, that got a long way because nobody was in the slightest bit interested in advancing to Hampshire County Council or Surrey County Council why they might like to contribute to Crossrail 2. And we sort of know what's happened to Crossrail 2, at least for the foreseeable future. So I can see housing and transport would be good reasons to have a bigger GLA. But then I have to look at the downsides of that. Do we really want a bigger GLA? Are we saying the GLA works so effectively as it is that we want to make it actually bigger? And the two things that I would observe in the GLA and the borough relationship. I'm involved with the Homes for Londoners Board. I've chaired subgroups of that, looking at new delivery models for housing. And some of the things we came up with required a far greater degree of cooperation between boroughs, or between boroughs and the GLA. But it just doesn't seem to happen. We don't seem to be able to get that degree of cooperation. So we can't do it with, I always forget, is it 32 or 33? 32 plus the city. We can't do it with 32 plus 1. Are we seriously going to do it with any more? And then the issue of the GLA and central government. Now, Jack's already alluded to, in fact, I think other speakers have as well, the relationship between GLA and central government is not good. That may be down to politics. Thankfully, it is starting to improve a little under the current regime. But I think we have a real issue in the GLA being an effective force when it has the relationship it does with central government, particularly over issues around financial devolution. So we make the GLA bigger, we just make the problem bigger. We've got to sort out the GLA. Then, of course, and this is the argument that Jack advanced, the relationship with the rest of the country. I think we already suffer from the hostility towards London of the rest of the UK. We create this huge super GLA, incorporating all of those areas on that map. Are we seriously saying that that's going to improve our relationship with the north of England? Although somebody did suggest the other day that given the way Scotland is going and the way we're trying to create perhaps a bigger powerhouse in the south, you could just miss out the part in between. We'd have two separate nation states, but I won't even go there. So the relationship with the rest of the country, I think, is a serious reason for not making the GLA any bigger. And then my third reason, and I'm fundamentally a pragmatist in terms of dealing with policy matters, it's just never going to happen. And interestingly, I mean, somebody actually alluded to Eric Pickle's dislike of reorganisation. Well, sorry, somebody alluded to the way central government shies away from any reorganisation of local government. And we now know it's the Pearl Revolver. Okay, I understand that. But I do remember back in the 90s, when we were looking, or the government was looking at reordering local government, I mean, they just didn't do it. They bottled it on so many different areas because there was so much objection. They weren't able to push it through. They are not going to tackle anything which is remotely as controversial as this. So I actually think the question we're being asked tonight is the wrong one. I think the answer we should be debating is how do we actually get the Greater South East to work coherently with London? How do we make that duty to cooperate really, really work? Now, a chap I knew in my BPF days called Tim Lunig. I think some of you may have come across him in policy terms. I remember having a very interesting discussion with him about how you made housing policy work across boundary. This wasn't specifically London and the rest, it was how you made the duty to cooperate work. And he had this interesting theory about you looked at the housing numbers as if they were chips, you put your chips on the table, you moved them onto the borough next door. They were not allowed to just drop them under the table, they had to do something with them. In other words, you had to have a proper negotiation to see where the chips, the housing chips, actually ended up. Didn't solve all the problems because ultimately you would need an arbiter. But the point is you couldn't let local authorities just drop the problem. And I think what we have done is just allow the boroughs and the neighbouring the boroughs, district councils outside of Greater London to drop the issues that they should be talking about on a cooperative basis. Now, we might debate what you put in place to make this happen. Is it carrots? Is it sticks? I remember having a conversation with Greg Clark, not Professor Greg Clark, the other Minister Greg Clark, some years ago, saying if you want to get local authorities to do something, then frankly, you've got to threaten to take their money away unless you actually do it. It's no good just asking them nicely, which tends to be what central government does. So my answer here is we want a better cooperation on housing, we want a better cooperation on transport with all those areas around Greater London. We won't get it by making London bigger, but we might actually try and get it by making the powers that are already there actually work better and putting some real oomph behind them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Trying to figure out on a scale of 1 to 10, how much consensus was there amongst our speakers, and where were these dividing lines? And it seems to me, just from my untidy jottings here, that there was actually some broad areas of consensus. There seemed to be, it's just shout at me if you think I've got this wrong. So there does seem to be a shared feeling that if London and the areas around it could identify and agree on some common interest and work together more productively on problems which they share or don't share to differing degrees, I accept, but certainly I think transport is something they would probably agree about quite a lot, then that would be a good thing. Yes, we sort of seem to agree on that roughly, I think. So it's a question of how you get there. So I thought there were some very interesting different nuances. So Andrew, I know, is very keen on devolving power to a very local level, and he articulated that. And it was interesting to me that you were saying, I think, if the way to overcome the reluctance of people in the home counties type areas is this idea of reforming local government, forget regional for the moment, reform local government, give strength and confidence and give greater powers to those areas. And then they might be more receptive to a greater London. Is that a reasonable?
Give people more control over their own lives and the areas in which they live, and then they start behaving responsibly. If they don't have power over their communities, they'll be irresponsible with their vote and their actions.
And do you think that if you accept that there are big problems with housing supply, not enough of it, not the right type, and so on, do you think that what you've described would lead to a greater to those problems being addressed more effectively?
Absolutely. I mean, if somebody's if you come along to a resident in outside London and you say we're going to build 10,000 homes in the paddock at the end of the lane, what do you think about it? They're going to say no. If, however, you say to them that you say to them, look, that primary school that you needed in the area and the doctor's surgery, well, we're going to provide that. We're going to provide homes with the first come, first served basis for local residents. And incidentally, we're going to pay your council tax for the next 2 years. Now, what do you think? Now, that when you engage with people and make it their project, they're much more likely to say, yeah, well, I never used that paddock at the end of the lane. But the instinct at the moment, because they're powerless, is to oppose.
Okay, so that's quite an optimistic view of how people would respond.
I like people.
I think that I'm not.
People are okay.
I'm not knocking it at all. But one of the things that is often discussed, among London society people and others, is the sense that the strong feelings and the participation in things like local planning committees and so on tends to come from a particular, perhaps not very representative group of people. You think that would change or could change?
One of the interesting things about the pandemic, we did a study on the London Assembly about the effects of the pandemic during, because we thought it's going to be dreadful, people's engagement with the planning process was going to be worse as a result of the pandemic, actually improved massively as a result of people, but those planning processes being more accessible via Zoom and all the rest of it. And actually they felt more engaged. So yes, you're quite right. It's the same old people, same old demographic typically. So you need to widen that. You need to involve people more. I know it sounds a bit Trotskyist, but that's my wing of the Tory party. So I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Now, so does anyone on the panel want to make the argument for a much more centralised approach to this, whereby you make the greater greater London bigger, and boss the boroughs and the home counties around a bit more, because that's the only way you're ever going to get anything done?
Well, I'll give it a go, but I think Liz's comment about the pile of chips is an interesting one, because housing, you can move around. You can, you can sort of allocate numbers of homes to different places that perhaps better suited to it. But I think the question comes when you start talking about infrastructure and things like reservoirs, solar farms, wind farms, rail networks. And the reality is that there are some places that those things have to go. And we've seen resistance in the home counties to things like particularly reservoir expansions and to a lesser degree solar farms. There are some decisions that simply cannot be made at the local level, and to an extent, I think I would add housing to that to a degree, because we need to start seeing housing as infrastructure, and you can't separate the two things. Housing should be in sustainable locations, not reliant on cars, close to train stations, close to local infrastructure and social infrastructure. And I wish my experience of sitting on planning committees, or observing planning committees, was different. But I do see these discussions taking place that are simply not to the benefit of wider society, and very, very concerned with local concerns, some of which are obviously very valid, but others which are, quite frankly, complete nonsense.
Okay. So I've heard it said by people much cleverer than me, that reorganizing local government is a distraction activity. It's just a way of looking as if you're doing something, and it's usually more trouble than it's worth. Okay, it's a gross simplification. So if that isn't the answer, is there any reason to be optimistic, Liz, making what's this the duty to cooperate? If you were in charge, how would you make the duty to cooperate work better?
Well, I define it very clearly, what I expected it to cover.
Yes.
It needn't be on everything, but it certainly should be looking on housing allocation. It certainly should be looking at transport. I didn't actually get on to industrial land, strategic industrial land, which I think is another interesting challenge for London,
Yes.
because quite a few of the industrial sites it's going to need will need to be outside of its actual GLA boundary.
Yes.
But then I would want to look at some very specific, as I said in my introduction, carrots and sticks to make sure that people, other boroughs, district councils or whatever, actually either saw something in it for them, or realised they would be penalised if they didn't sit down and cooperate on where those 10,000 homes are going to go, and the infrastructure that needs to support them, and or the industrial sites, and or the railway lines, or whatever else.
Right.
But I mean, at the end of the day, I think central government has pussyfooted around how it should actually get local government to deliver on the broader national mandates.
Okay,
And
so
I'm
you-
afraid to say, even though I do concede that a degree of financial devolution is useful, actually that in itself would be a way of ensuring better performance, better cooperation. You can have this if you do the following.
So quite a lot of carrot and quite a lot of stick.
Bit of both.
The right balance.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Jack, where do you stand on the
I'm meant to be the dispassionate,
Well,
although
stop it.
I did use the term NIMBY, which I shouldn't have used. Actually, you're right to pull me up on that. I was trying to make a wider point about the idea of expanding London, not necessarily meaning that sort of local issues or opposition suddenly vanish. I'm actually very keen on Andrew's idea of greater devolution. Just, I guess where that leads me is kind of a much smaller London or a more segmented London, you know, inner London, outer London being more distinct rather than a larger, more homogeneous area. I guess my point was that a problem in Epsom in Surrey over whether or not we can get more houses built on a particular site, and people have legitimate views either way. If you give the Mayor of London control or some area of control by expanding London over it, it's not necessarily going to make the situation better. I couldn't really see a larger London run by Boris Johnson or Sadiq Khan or whoever the next mayor is necessarily being sort of warmly welcomed by people in the home county.
Yeah,
That was kind of my point.
okay. Because you've also got to think about the situation whereby a borough might say no, the mayor might say yes, and then the government says no. So you've got that whole.
At that point, it all
hierarchy
becomes
of
irrelevant
powers as well.
anyway.
God, it's a bit of a mess, isn't it? Would anybody from the audience like to ask a question? Yes, hang on. So the first hand I saw was there, gentleman in the glasses, then gentleman over there, and then Nikki, if that's all right.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel. This is a fascinating discussion. I really valued the different perspectives. I've lived in about 7 or 8 London boroughs and recently moved to St Albans and think about this often. Things I miss: buses, waste collection. We have to sort our recycling. So I do think there are, at a very basic level, London does a lot of things better. Things I'm glad I don't have to deal with: the Met Police. And the idea of a police authority covering 20 million then leads us down this model of maybe the French model of a core city and Ile-de-France is the way forward, because strategic planning and housing could be done by one authority and then policing and things like that by another. We probably do need 3 layers of government in this country. And I take your point, local government reorganization is a pain, but this government has been chopping and changing regional government left, right and centre. We've got subnational transport bodies. We've got LEPs, I think, still. We've got all sorts of different borders for health agencies and so on. So I think the innovation could be in the regional layer, maybe leave London where it is or move it to the M25, something a bit more psychologically London. But think, how can we make regional government better, not just here? And that's the offer to the rest of the country as well.
Great,
Although interestingly, that would have been the Pearl Revolver, because Eric Pickles would have got his Pearl Revolver out for anybody who mentioned the R words. But I, by the way, agree with you. I mean, I think it was unfortunate.
Does anybody else want to respond to that?
Just very quickly, I like the point about psychologically London. That's something that perhaps we haven't mentioned quite so much. People relating to the idea of being in London, you know, the idea that I'm happy to pay a little bit of precept towards the GLA because I feel I am a Londoner. And that is kind of an issue that matters as well. It's not just about how things are run, which is very important, but also whether or not people identify that way. And I guess that's an argument for keeping the boundaries roughly where they are.
And I think there's an accountability thing here as well, because more and more people outside London are wishing that they had a vote, are wishing they had some say, especially, for example, over the rather contentious expansion of the ULEZ zone. You're starting to see people from out of London wishing that they had some say, which they don't have. We barely have any say in London, but they have even less.
Russell.
Well, yeah, I'm unsure about this idea of this psychology. I think certain people in Bromley and Havering might have a different sense of what it is to be a Londoner than others. So I'm already a little bit sceptical about the idea that you know, we all feel like Londoners, and expanding the borough, you know, expanding the borough boundaries might what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of dilute that slightly. I'm not sure that really exists.
You can be more than one identity, you know. I mean, I was born in Middlesex, and I'm very proud to have been born in Middlesex, and I use Middlesex in my address when I lived there. But I'm also a Londoner. You can do both. You absolutely can do both.
Can we just, before we go on to our next question, can we just get you, can you just set out for people who may not have heard where you stand on golf courses?
Oh, golf courses. Okay, so what Dave's referring to is a piece of research that I did about 18 months ago, looking at golf courses in London, and it's really sort of about equity of open space in London. And there are something like 94 golf courses in London. You add them all together, they're the same or larger than the whole of Brent. And most of them, well, not most of them, but almost half are owned by the local authorities themselves. So, and I know it was really a question of whether that use of space is one that's serving Londoners well. There are actually another 75 golf courses within 5 kilometres of London's boundaries. That's 150 something, no, 160 golf courses.
You'd thin them out a bit, would you, Russell?
I would thin them out a bit. I think there's probably
build
too
some
many.
new towns on.
Build some new towns on that.
Okay, all right,
Yes.
okay. So there are a couple of contentious golf course things going on. I think one down by Wimbledon and one up in
That's-
Enfield, if I remember right.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
can we go to our second question, please? Gentleman over here, microphone, thank you.
What are the cost benefits to Londoners of enlarging London? And what are the cost benefits to the nation?
Could you repeat, could you just?
The second bit, sorry, the cost benefits of,
Enlarging London,
yeah,
and what are the cost benefits to the nation?
oh, to the nation. To the nation.
Good, that is a very good question. Jack.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to do the maths? So a larger London would possibly, if it was successful and it meant that everything was run a little bit better, transport very successful, more housing delivered, London funds the rest of the country as it is. So a larger and more successful London would obviously be of benefit economically to the nation, I guess I would argue. Politically, it would be an absolute disaster and a nightmare, but economically, that would be really good. What's the other aspect? I mean, there are loss of identity, all of those other issues are costs, I guess. I don't kind of know where to start with that.
But that was a big if in that, wasn't it? If enlarging it led to transport
Yes.
run better, and if it led to more housing.
Don't really directly answer the question from the gentleman who would like to. Andrew?
Well, the cost benefit. I mean, you know, if a larger London doesn't mean more housing, I'm not for it. You know, but I do believe it will, because the obstacles to providing housing in the southeast. And remember, this is not a London housing problem. It's not a London housing problem. It's a problem in the southeast of housing, and yet we're not dealing with it as a southeast, because we're going back to our own little shtetls, you know, in the counties and the GLA, and we're doing our own stuff, when actually we could do a whole lot more if we cooperated and were able to provide those incentives for people to build more homes.
And sorry,
And that would make everyone's life
and
better.
just to be just on transport, and I'm thinking particularly of rail. I think that we've had Labour and Conservative mayoral candidates agreeing that more control over suburban rail should be devolved to TfL. Is there a general agreement about that?
Well, I mean, in principle, it's right. The trouble is the current mayor is not a great ambassador for that. I mean, the government's just not going to give him
And if you
more control, because he uses a political tool. That's the political bit.
If you perchance became the Conservative candidate for mayor next year, what would your position on that be?
We become much more cooperative rather than using transport as a political weapon against the government. You actually say this will benefit the whole country for transport improvements, and the country's got to realise that's why. You know, they think everything's going into London, which is nonsense. But this benefits the rest of London. And, you know, we've been referred to like from the north of England, you know, people saying, bloody London that gets all the money and all the rest of it. And isn't it awful down there? And I much prefer up north. And I always say to them, well, that's fine, have your opinion, but please send our money back.
Okay.
You know.
Can I just quickly respond to that? I mean, the question for me is not whether we can afford to do it. We can not whether we can't afford to do it, because actually we look at productivity. It is atrocious, and it's because people aren't able to move to where the jobs are. There are people starting families later because they can't afford decent housing. There are 3.6 million young adults still living with their parents in this country because they're not able to get into the homes that they need and start the lives that they productive, fruitful lives that they deserve, because we're not building enough housing in the right place. So it's a question of whether we can not afford to do something about that problem, and that's a transport and housing and infrastructure problem.
Transport is a housing issue and housing is a transport.
Exactly right.
Absolutely clear.
Right.
Just all sorry, if I just add one other thing there.
Yes.
One other way of addressing that problem, levelling up, whatever you're going to call it, right? Making sure that not everybody is trying to come to one city in this country,
Yes.
but actually a thriving Manchester, thriving Liverpool.
Okay.
But you do that by making places desirable and productive to live, not just moving people there in the first place. And this is one of the problems that none of us are living on a smelting factory outside Runcorn, because that's where we're told that the money needs to be invested.
Okay, now I know the microphone has moved on, but I'm going to ask the gentleman who asked the question. Do you have a view that you'd like to share with us about what you think should happen?
To initiate change, you must have clear objectives and justifications for the change.
Yes.
We've got to do, yeah, we got
Well, what are your justifications for enlarging London?
okay, all right.
Do you not think we've answered that question?
Pardon?
Do you not think that we've answered that? That was not a satisfactory answer.
Well, you tried.
I'll
good.
take that.
All right. Okay, nicely done. Thank you. So Nikki Gavron, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes, it's on. It's on, is it?
No, and actually, I don't think it is on. Is this mic?
Oh, it's on a bit.
Now,
That's better.
That's better, yeah.
like a lollipop.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make a few comments and then ask a question, which is that London's functional urban region is much greater than the outer metropolitan area or the Greenbelt, metropolitan Greenbelt. And people commute. I was just talking to Tony. I don't know what the breakdown is of commuters from the wider functional urban region, which is huge. It's Greater Southeast, and from the local area. Just things that might connect. I remember once talking to the most successful company, I won't name it, might not be so successful now, in Enfield, and they had marvelous employing only local people, marvelous retention policies. But in fact, when I questioned, I've been around a long time, years later, I found that all those people who worked for that company had moved out of London, because they wanted family housing or bigger family housing, and so there's an issue about family housing.
Okay.
And then I wanted to make a point about where we've been. I so want to back what Liz Peace was saying, because I do think the conundrum for us is that we have no power over the bigger strategic issues which cross the wider Southeast. Okay. Waste, water, energy, surface transport, some air transport, yes.
Yeah.
But in fact, and if you think about it, and housing numbers and so on, it just goes on. And you mentioned industrial land, which is a good one too.
Yes.
We have no power over any of these big strategic issues. We have no ability at all to work with our hinterland. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember, Andrew, but when I was on the Assembly, I don't know, either you were chair or I was deputy chair or vice versa of the planning committee. We actually, we coxed and boxed all the time, the two of us, and we got on really well. We actually put forward to the last Mayor's London plan, we put forward that there should be a secretariat for the Greater Southeast, just as we had in the days of Surplan. Now, you called me a legend, but I've been around a long time. But in fact, I was the lead member on Surplan in the 90s. And I don't know how many of you remember that. We produced the Southeast Regional Plan. And we had a crack secretariat, which did all the research on these big issues.
Okay.
I mean, it was a bit different. I mean,
Yeah.
at one stage, Lord Carnarvon was running it, and he took me out to lunch and said, Nikki, you can have your affordable housing if I can have my golf courses.
Okay.
And I just
So
want,
do you think that there is, you know, are you sort of taking the optimistic view that the mechanisms either are in place or could be put in place quite easily?
well, what I'm
It's about
trying to say is,
willpower.
I think
Yeah.
we need to be, we really need to be working with authorities in the Greater South East to work together on this.
Okay.
And we need to get up something, which it's what Liz was saying, but it's got to be much greater than duty to cooperate, which clearly hasn't worked.
Okay.
I'm just
All
saying
right.
that. And I
Great.
wanted to add one more thing.
Okay.
Which is I've just come from the mayor's launch of his rewilding task force report and also an international one. And I just want to say that our far-sighted forebears, laudable objectives, the green belt, you know, five purposes, all about the separation of land, the regeneration of cities, keeping land open, all those, but nothing, as now was it was Russell who said it, bang on, about the quality of that land. And because there is no purpose about the quality of the land, it can be left to get degraded, and you get hope value, you get options taken out. And that's why so much of it isn't fulfilling the purpose it could fulfill, which is a massive reservoir of natural capital and ecosystem services, which could work much harder.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Now, look, I'm very mindful of the time. We've got to be, it's chucking out in 20 minutes. We've got hands popping up all over the place. So I'm going to take, before we get to responding to things, I'm going to take the first 3 hands that I saw before, and then we've got some more hands. So you, sir, Mr. Gordon, I think, and Alex, we'll have your 3 questions all together. Some quick answers and to Nikki's points, and then the other hands that have.
Hi, Alex Bax from My Fair London. But actually, a long.
I'm sorry, I missed.
Alex Bax from My Fair London, but I'm actually here as a
Right.
old city. I don't know what policy person. I was thinking of no one mentioned the Marshall report, and the other question which could come up is the size of local authorities. Marshall proposed 50 London boroughs with the idea that the boroughs are too big, the GLA was too small. That perhaps speaks to Andrew's point.
Okay.
I hesitate to put another reorganisation on the table, but I think that if localism is actually quite a good one.
Okay.
In terms of answering some of those points. So functional local government at a smaller scale and expanded might be a way to go. Although I tend to agree with Liz that it's never going to happen. To share one other perspective, I remember in the mayor's office meetings, an American investor who just located his European headquarters in London. I said, whereabouts? He said, Swindon.
There you go. Okay. So can we go to Ian Gordon at the back there, please?
Thank you very much. It's been a really interesting evening, but I'm struck by the avoidance of one word and concept. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about functions which need to be fulfilled, particularly on a regional scale, and none about leadership. And it seems to me that the crucial question is, well, what kind of London authority or what kind of extended London authority would actually have the muscle and incentive to lead the other actors across this region on a long-term basis, given that in the present system, we have an individual who's elected on an individual basis for a 4-year term, within which, if we're lucky, which we won't be this time, a new plan gets written. We don't even know what happens after that. So there is no testing on outcomes any more than there is in relation to policing. So there are big questions of leadership around here. Do you have views about what kind of remodeling of the London system would actually provide the leadership basis for the sorts of change which you think are necessary? And I would want to say that I think the GLA has systematically avoided fulfilling this role quite deliberately.
Okay, and Alex, please. And then I'm going to ask you all to be really quick, pick up, try and cover as much as you can.
Thank you. Alex Chan, involved with bids and various other things in London. My question is, if we were to ask the people in the wider area, the candidate areas tomorrow to vote to join Greater London, if they wanted to, would any of them vote to join, and where would they be?
Okay. All right. So shall we start with that last one? Do you think there's, so what you're really asking, I suppose, is there much popular appetite for it out there beyond the boundary?
I think it's what the deal is. If you just ask them that they're going to join, no, they're not going to. They're not going to. And there's London boroughs who don't want to be a part because they still don't know what the deal is. There's no undertaking. There has to come with some sweetness as well.
Okay.
I mean, to go on to go on to the leadership. Well,
yeah,
I don't believe in elected mayoralties. I never have, but it's another one that I'm not going to win. You know, a secret of politics is know when you've lost. But I don't believe in them. I believe that individual people standing for election and being able to represent their areas should have power along with it. I have no power as an assembly member except at budget time, when under rare circumstances we can overturn the mayor's budget. I would remodel the government as well, but you know, we are in fantasy land now because the government's in no mood to introduce that kind of local democracy back into local authorities.
Okay. Anybody else want to pick up on any of those points?
Well, just on that point, I think, you know, we look at London County Council, it's quite a homogenous area, quite a strong layer of government that could really do things. I think when you expanded those boundaries, you had to sort of dilute the powers a little bit. I think if we were going to expand the boundaries again, as a presumption, you'd have to dilute those powers even more and be more, you know, devolve power more locally. So perhaps a mayor would be inappropriate. A mayor of the entire wider southeast would perhaps make no sense whatsoever. So a council made up of these regional parts, perhaps, you know, I would have thought that a mayor of an area that large would just be slightly insane. So there's a point there. On the referendum point, you know, would particular areas want to join? Totally agree with Andrew's point that lots of places would want to leave. Havering, you know, wants to leave London and leave the EU, and you know, it's quite a leafy place. Bromley a very leafy place, but also probably would want to leave. I remember during coronavirus, the argument that Bromley should have been in a different tier of restrictions because it's just not like London. It's much more spread out, and we're not all catching the virus in Bromley. So you could read it. I'm sure some places would join, some places would leave. The shape of Greater London's pretty stupid anyway when you look at it, that weird little leg in the southwest. You know, it would be an even more wobbly boundary, but it'd be out of date in 10 years. You know, as people move about, you know, this point that people are constantly moving out of London into the wider southeast, the boundary would change. It'd be redundant almost instantly again.
Did you want to come in?
I just wanted to probably just go back to Nikki's point, actually, because I remember Serplan, so I'm quite old. We both are, Nikki, it's all right. And I think this sort of plays to this point about regional cooperation and about the R word. And I think it was a grave mistake that we got rid of the R word in our planning. Now, you know, GLA is not a region in its own right. It is, you know, I don't see it as that. It is part of a greater southeast. You won't ever govern it as one place, but you do it through cooperation. And, you know, if Nikki said that secretariat worked, well, let's recreate it. Let's try and make that happen. We did a piece of work at the Centre for London, didn't we? Looking at the greater southeast and making it more effective through cooperation.
Right, great. Now, so we had a hand here and we had Tony. Oh, we got another. Okay, so if we can be really quick with our questions and really quick with our answers, because we are well over time now.
Actually, I do want to support the Serplan. I do remember working on it as well. I'd just like to ask about levelling up. If you make a bigger region of London, at the moment, the tendency is to try and take everything away from London, especially in terms of funding, take away everything about culture, we're moving everything out. Does that mean that more of our region in the southeast is going to suffer? You know, we're going to lose more money and everything is going to move further out.
Great, thank you very much. Tony.
Tony Travers from the, is this working? Tony Travers from the LSE. I mean, most senior politicians and civil servants looking at that map and the districts in it would think there's far too many local authorities, far too many. What they would like to do is to get rid of as many as possible. So Buckinghamshire has already become a county unitary. The new North Yorkshire county unitary is the same geographical size as Kent and East Sussex and West Sussex and most of Surrey added together. So the most likely next step would be the creation of a series, and Essex has taken over Thurrock, of course, for different reasons. So the most likely next move outside London would be the creation of perhaps 8 or 9 unitary authorities surrounding London. Now, does that then present a very different equals-based opportunity for some kind of combined authority?
Okay, great. And final question of the night, please. Microphone here. Thank you.
I first really enjoyed that. I think we're all here because to a greater or lesser extent, we feel that the current system isn't working. Speaking as a 20-something, living through the current housing crisis, and as you said, housing is transport. I have to live in inner London. I think it's not just a London problem, but it's going to happen in London first. We're going to lose a generation of workers, of opportunity for people. So I wanted to hopefully be a bit more hopeful here. And does anyone have any one idea that they want to kind of leave the room with for a solution? London focused, because this is going to be felt in London first. So,
Okay,
yeah.
great, thanks. So I don't know, Russell, you're the nearest person to me, so
Right.
answer one of those questions.
That's a big one to answer. I mean, the reality, of course, is that no one solution is going to solve all this stuff. I'm thinking of it from a sort of a spatial point of view and a policy point of view. No one solution is going to solve all this stuff. I think Andrew and I are in agreement that certainly we need to be looking at new garden towns or new settlements within the southeast region that aren't just loading all the development into London, although London does clearly need to do, particularly the outer London boroughs, need to do a lot more in terms of housing delivery. I think the loss of housing targets is an absolute disaster. Whether they were calculated correctly, whether they're appropriate is a different issue, but I think there has to be some form of stick at least to make sure that the outer London, sorry, the boroughs outside London are doing more to contribute to housing delivery and all the other things.
Okay, what about the fear that the home counties areas might lose out if there were changes?
I'm not an economist clearly, but I think there's a big issue we haven't talked about revenue generated taxation and allowing far greater capturing of value in these authorities. You deliver more homes, you get more local investment, you capture more of that value uplift, and allowing that to be much more flexibility in how that's spent, and you know, obviously a fundamental reform of council tax, because council tax is completely dysfunctional at the moment, and generating more tax revenue that can be spent locally would encourage development.
Tony's scenario, possible scenario, does that sound like something that might be heading in the right direction?
That's the government's instincts, is to combine what's already there rather than redraw lines, as we've seen from all the metro mayors. They didn't draw any new lines, so they just included loads of authorities in one.
Yeah.
Can I just say on the housing, anyone who says there's a single solution to the housing problem is a charlatan, and you shouldn't pay any attention to them. But there are things that I think would make a contribution, and if it's one takeaway, is that we want to start, and because Russell and I disagree vociferously and then agree vociferously, I think the best thing in the world is to get rid of the housing targets. Absolutely best thing in the world, because what we need to recreate is the housing market. There's too few people building homes and making money out of building homes or letting homes or renting homes out. There's too few people involved in it because we've made it a very, very rich company's pastime, and we need to be able to make it worth people's while to get in the housing business again. And we're not, we've let that wither and die over the years. With regard to levelling up, as far as I mean, I'm no fan of levelling up. I mean, I know that I've got party colleagues in the audience, and I'm sorry about this, but levelling up to me sounds like socialism. I mean, it absolutely, it's about, we'll take it there and put it there. Why don't you just leave more money in London And then we're big-hearted people in London. We're quite happy to subsidise the rest of the country. We know it's our duty as the capital city, but what we don't want to do is be told that we, you know, for piddling little bits of expenditure, we've got constantly go to the Whitehall in order to get it approved through some multi-committee system.
Okay.
And smaller boroughs. Sorry, sir, we passed over your smaller boroughs. When I was leading Hillingdon, I broke the thing up. Because I was sitting on planning committees, ruling about whether or not somebody could have a porch extension for a part of the borough I'd never seen. And it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. So I broke it up into four. The Labour Party put them all back again, but broke it up into four so we can really introduce local decision-making back into local authorities.
Thank you, Liz. Would you?
I've got one idea for solving the housing problem. I don't know whether some of you remember, but a few years ago, the Wolfson Prize was being offered to somebody who came up with solutions for housing development. And the solution was a notional place that was quite clearly Oxford, even though they disguised the name. I can't remember what the winners actually used. And what they said was, you put some new settlements around Oxford in what was green belt. So let's translate that onto this. We actually take some of Russell's green belt and we look at a new series of, call them what you like, garden towns, new towns, garden suburbs. You don't take all the green belt, you leave plenty of space in between, which you improve as per Nikki's rewilding, you actually make it really good green space. And for those new settlements, let's say you put 5 around London, you make sure there are brilliant transport connections. So people can actually get into London, they can get between them, they don't become car dominated. Now, I recall, I think the winners were Urbed. I can't remember who came up with this notional Oxford town. And the then housing secretary, Brandon Lewis, just threw it out straight away because it involved doing something in the green belt. So, you know, actually, I think that's where we start to need to think creatively about how we expand London without making it a political borough organisation issue.
Okay, well, like we've gone way over time. It's 5 to 8. Do you want to say thank you to everybody, or should we both do it? Or
first of all, hello. Can we give our panel an amazing round of applause? And I'd like to just point out the gentleman at the front who asked the last question, which was about London and housing, and that's what it's all about. Actually, how do we solve this crisis? And it is a crisis. And how do we all collectively get our heads together and figure this out? And I think I was just reflecting, you know, again on age. And I think one of the issues as you get older, you get a bit risk averse. You know, you get the war wounds and the scars of having to go to battle every day. And that's kind of hard work. And that's why we need the younger generation to be bringing in other ideas and fresh energy and working together with people like our panelists, people like Nikki, Tony, those sorts of people and the others in the room who've got all of this experience, but working more collectively. So please, if you're not a member of the London Society, or if you can't afford the membership and you're young, come and see us. We'll give you a free one. But let's keep this conversation going. It's only just begun. And thank you very much for taking the time out on this beautiful spring evening to come here. And thanks again to Convene for giving us the space for free. Thank you very much.